As a TV star, few have been as famous or have endured as long. He spent 11 years starring on the TV hit MASH, where he was nominated for an astounding 21 Emmy Awards. He directed the series' 2.5-hour finale, which is still the most watched show in television history. But that's not the sum total of this man. He has continued to find home both on TV, on The West Wing, and on the silver screen, working regularly with director Woody Allen. He has been recognized for his work by the Tonys, the Oscars, the People's Choice, Golden Globe, and the Screen Actors Guild. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on InnerVIEWS, our conversation with Alan Alda. What's the key to telling a good story?
Oh, that's an interesting question. You know, I grew up on the stage. I grew up either standing in the wings watching stage performances, or I was on the stage telling a story through action. Right. And action is what I think, in my bones, it makes a good story. And by action, I don't mean car chases. It's the opposite of that. It's not muscular action. It's action inside the head. What is a character trying to accomplish, and how does that character go about getting it? Mm-hmm. You know, and when I understood this in my bones, and then when I got to college and I read Aristotle's Poetics, I realized somebody had figured this out.
It wasn't you.
And put it into words 2,400 years ago, and it means a lot to me. I go back to that. I reread it a lot when I talk to young writers and young actors. I talk about this all the time, and my friends who write plays and say, "Oh, you want to read this? Tell me what you think." After a while, they stop giving it to me because I always come up with the same ideas that I'm not sure that you're keeping it active enough. You know, a terrible moment in storytelling is when the writer thinks it's okay to do exposition. Mm-hmm. It usually stops everything dead. And exposition is at its worst when two characters are saying to each other things that they already know, but the writer needs the audience to know. You know, It's almost impossible not to do it in a historical drama. Well, Mr. Lincoln, the war has been on for 3 weeks now. What is he supposed to say? Oh, really? 3 weeks? Jeez, I don't get a paper here. You know what I mean? They don't. People. That doesn't happen. But rather than that, you can do it the way Shakespeare usually did it, which was to have people fighting about something, arguing about something, trying to convince one another of something, and in the course of that, to make their argument, they make their argument through presenting the information to the other character that the audience needs to know. But they don't do it because the author has to say it. They do it because the character has to say it.
Right.
It's doing, making, attempting, trying to achieve. I think that makes a story.
When you write a book as opposed to a script, then,
yeah.
Do you approach that differently, or is it the same ideas?
Well, because I have this background in this kind of storytelling, I think of all writing that way. Something's always going someplace. I always think of it as a horse to ride.
Yeah.
You know, once you're on that horse and it's going someplace, then I think the listener or the reader or the audience is with you on that. They want to see what's coming next. They want to see if you're going to make it. There's kinetic energy in it. I think everybody's mind responds to that. But I remember reading a long time ago an example of a good descriptive passage. Maybe it was Robert Louis Stevenson. I can't remember. And he described a bay, and he compared the bay to a hook or something like that. And he went around the bay like this. Even in that description of a still life scene, in a way, mm-hmm. there was action, because he was making his way across it in your imagination. It's a lower form of action, but there was almost a kind of action in it.
As an actor, then, if you're given a script that isn't well written,
yeah.
how do you deal with that then?
I have this system. I don't do it.
Okay, what if though?
When I was young and I couldn't avoid
Right.
it, when you had to take everything that comes. And by the way, sometimes you make a mistake. Sometimes you think it's not as good as it could be. Maybe it'll get better. Maybe everybody working on it will find something richer in it, and that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
That still happens from time to time. But I always look for. I don't add anything that's not there. I mean, I just try to find what's there. What clues are there to what this person wants, and then I try to reach the point where I not only want what the character wants, but I feel I deserve to get it.
Yeah.
If you deserve to get it, nothing will stand in your way. I mean, I really wanted to win the election on West Wing, and I was real. I wanted to win it so much when I was watching the episode where they had the vote coming in. Right up until the last minute, I thought the vote might go my way, and we had already shot it.
Right. So where did this love of all of this come from?
Well, standing in the wings, watching my father and watching burlesque comics, and watching vaudeville performers, and watching my father on Broadway, standing off on the side while he was making movies.
Yeah.
You can't watch for all those years. I watched for 15, 16 years. Almost from the time I was born. You can't watch all that time without wanting to get up and do it. You also think you know something, but you see it at the best possible angle when you're off in the wings, because you see it from the side. They're creating an illusion for the audience. The audience, when they see it from the front, are getting the benefit of the illusion. But when you look at it from the side, you're seeing a great deal of how they create the illusion. But It's all aimed out that way. And you hear the vocal production, you see the sweat flying, you see the physical energy involved, and you see them tossing it back and forth between them. And when I watched Blackstone the Magician in vaudeville, I saw where he hid the pigeons, and the audience couldn't see that. And I could see all those years where the actors were hiding the pigeons.
What happens when the point comes that your mentors, you surpass them? How do you deal with that?
In many ways, you never surpass your mentors, because you're who you are and they're who they are, and they can be the best them that they can be, than anybody can be, and you can be the best you. So it's very hard to compare talents. Yeah. I find that almost impossible. I mean, therefore awards, although I love to get them, are not really a measure of much. Not seriously a measure of anything. But I thought I surpassed my father, who was my earliest mentor. I thought I surpassed him when I was 10 years old. That's how arrogant I was.
Yeah.
I was giving him line readings when I was 10 years old, and he thought it was funny. And I didn't know what he thought was so funny. I thought, that's a pretty good reading I'm giving him.
You talk about arrogance. It must be hard to come off an event like the finale of MASH, when it is the most watched television episode in the history of television.
Yeah.
How do you then face the next day? What does something like that do to your head, to your idea of who you are in this whole world?
I don't know. I always was under the impression I had less of an understanding of how popular or successful I was than other people did. I mean, it was a shock to realize that so many people were watching the final episode of MASH. I knew it was a hit, of course,
right.
But I knew the show was a hit, the series. But when we were coming home from watching, we were going to a restaurant, the cast. We had watched the movie on a big screen at the studio, and we were driving to a restaurant, and I suddenly realized the streets were almost deserted. And I said to Loretta Swit, Loretta, look, they're home watching it. That means like everybody. It was like half the country was watching. And that came as a surprise. I don't think I got arrogant about the shows being successful. Part of the reason for that is that, I mean, to the extent that that's true, is that we all knew that it was bigger than all of us put together, and certainly any of us singly. something happened. There was some extra ingredient. There was an emergent property that happened as a result of these people coming together that was more than the sum of the parts, and we all knew that. We could see it happening. We'd be amazed at what we were coming up with, that we knew worked, and so it would be stupid to take for any one of us to act like he was or she was the one responsible for it.
Right. Do we lose anything as a community not having moments like that anymore? And what I mean by that is we've got DVRs and VCRs and things, all the different choices. So there's never a moment where
never a time
the
when everybody
whole
watches
country
the same thing.
sees something in a single moment together.
Well, it may be that people are still hungry for that, because I noticed that there are these programs where people call in and vote, and
Right.
talent contests and things like that. And then every once in a while they have an election, and some people even take part in that.
Yeah, occasionally.
Not as many.
Yeah.
Maybe they should have a dance contest
See,
instead of a
there
debate.
you go.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
It'd be different.
Yeah. Well, not that different.
Yeah. How do you feel about the political system today? How are you feeling? Happy about it? Disappointed in it?
I was very active politically a long time ago, 25 years ago, 25 or 30 years ago, and I campaigned for the Equal Rights Amendment. And I really worked hard at that, and I feel now that I gave it the office, and I don't talk about politics in public.
Yeah.
I'm a citizen, and I'm concerned, and I read a couple of papers every day, and I write imaginary op-ed pieces in my head, but I don't send them in.
Yeah. When you're doing the West Wing, though.
Well, that was wonderful. Those people were very talented, very knowledgeable about politics, and I learned an enormous amount. I mean, now when I read the paper and I see that the White House is putting out a statement or there's a speech being done, and I think of I read some of the key phrases in it, I start to think about the scenes that would have taken place on West Wing leading up to that phrase being the one chosen.
Yeah.
Can't say that because you'll alienate these people. Can't say, try this. Let's go for that, and that kind of thing. So I used to think of it more as a more spontaneous communication, but I can see now why it wouldn't be.
Yeah. When you decided to sit down and write stories of your life,
Yeah.
was it hard to pick what you were going to address? Were there things you said, this is off guards, this is off limits, I'm not sharing this?
No, except that I make a distinction between what's personal and what's private. As a writer or as an actor, as any kind of an artist, I think you have to be personal. Certainly in the kind of writing that I tend to, all the writing I do, I'm as personal as I can be. But I don't think I have to talk about things that I feel are private. Then there's a distinction. Yeah. By personal I mean a real personal response to the things that have happened to me, and an honest accounting of that, rather than some kind of general stereotypical response. The way you're supposed to feel when something happens. Mm-hmm. How are you supposed to feel when your mother dies, or how are you supposed to feel when you find out she's psychotic? And I found out my mother was psychotic very early in my life. As she tried to stab my father. The first sentence of my book is, my mother didn't try to stab my father until I was 6. And it's, I don't consider that private, but I have a personal response to that and the other events in my life. I try to find out what the details were that call that up, that evoke that, and make it live again. Because I think if you can tell a human experience in enough detail that it takes place in the reader's mind or the audience's mind, and they, for a moment, through this active imagination, they can enter into it with you. Mm-hmm. That's an experience that we all want. We all want to get warmed up to one another by virtue of understanding what the other person is going through, because it's what we go through. It's a way of getting more personal in our own lives.
When you talk about that experience, though, is there a private set of memories that go with it that you choose not to share?
Oh, sometimes I'm sure there are. Yeah, there are some things. Sometimes, I talked about how with my father, as much as I adored him, I had a competitive relationship with him, and I talk about that and I detail it. But sometimes there were one or two times when I thought harsh to my father. One of those times I have in the book, and it seems okay to me. There were one or two times that it would take too much to get into that I left out. I felt that was private. It was a couple of other things that I thought were not. There's nothing that I was ashamed of or anything. In fact, something I might be proud of, how I cared for him in certain specific ways. But I left it out because it was too private.
Yeah. When you found out your mother was, or I should ask it this way, when did you realize your mother was mentally ill and it just wasn't mom's behavior?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because nobody talked about mental illness when I was young. I mean, it's hard for people now to believe that because people go on television and talk about their mental illnesses. They talk about their sex lives. There's almost nothing private now. And in those days, it was a great shame to have mental illness in the family, and it wasn't even identified as illness. I mean, my mother was schizophrenic and paranoid, and later in her life had visual hallucinations. She saw the devil and was convinced it was the devil and wouldn't go into the bedroom and sleep, wouldn't go into the kitchen and cook.
Right.
She lived on pizza. I mean, she's really lucky that the delivery man wasn't the devil because she would have starved to death.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she was really overcome by it. And because my father and I never even talked about it, I didn't have a way to handle it. I sometimes thought it was my fault that she was behaving so. I didn't know it was illness. And later on, I started to understand. In my teens probably.
When you started to realize that, did then that give you the ability to forgive earlier behavior, or doesn't it just go away because you understand?
There were waves of forgiveness, and each time I thought I had forgiven her, and it needed forgiving because as a boy, I didn't understand where this was coming from, and I really hated her for it. There's an example of not. I didn't write down what I was supposed to feel, that I was supposed to feel compassion. I wrote down what I felt. I hated her, and I had to get over that. I had to understand her. I had to have compassion for her if I was going to grow up. And I thought I did accomplish that 2 or 3 times in my life. And it wasn't until I was writing the book that I got a final wave of it that got to be much more internal. And that was when I realized I had been avoiding learning about schizophrenia. Even though I have a very strong interest in science, I would be learning about neutrinos and the genome and all kinds of things, but I wouldn't be finding out more about schizophrenia. So I realized while I was writing it, I got to do something about this. I can't stay ignorant of this. So I started calling up scientists who I had interviewed on my science program, and I started reading more. And I came across this bit of information that really clicked for me. It was that the scientist had found that the part of the brain that gets flooded with certain chemicals when a schizophrenic has a visual hallucination is the same part of the brain that gets flooded when we have nightmares, so that we've experienced what they experience. And I began to realize that the nightmares I've had were very much the terrifying experiences she had, except I could wake up from mine and she couldn't.
Right.
And I had, because I knew I had the similar experience, I had much more real compassion for her. And so it went to another level in me.
So can you close the chapter on that now? Can the forgiveness be done?
Oh, yeah, there's not even a question of forgiveness. Now, I mean, forgiveness was a stage where I thought there was something to forgive. I mean, you don't have to forgive a child who spills a glass of milk.
Right.
It's just part of what happens in the world when things aren't in the kind of control that you wish they were.
Yeah. On a whole different note, how then do you make a marriage work?
How do you make a marriage work? Well, I think you love each other.
Yeah.
Arlene and I make our marriage work through spite and malice, which is the name of a card game that we play.
All right.
Play that almost every day, and within it takes an hour to play a game. Within 20 minutes, we're cursing each other and laughing, and because you really are vicious with the other player, and it's great fun, and we love to laugh. We're married almost 50 years, and so I get asked this question a lot. Well, how do you? I have no idea how you make a marriage work. The only thing I can suggest is be in love, and how people go about that, I have no idea.
What was it that brought the two of you together then? What was that click that you knew it was right?
I was invited to somebody's house to hear chamber music, and she was playing the Mozart Clarinet Quintet. She was a professional clarinetist, and I fell in love with her from afar that night, and was too shy to talk to her. And then we got invited to the same apartment a month or two later for dinner, and then I had this sensational realization that she laughed at my jokes, and the thing that cemented it was the woman who had invited us to dinner, who we eventually named our third child after. She had made a rum cake for dessert, and she put it up on top of the refrigerator to cool. And it was an old Philco refrigerator with a sloping top that shook while it operated. The motor was so old it shook. And little by little during dinner, the cake moved to the edge of the refrigerator and plopped onto the floor. And Arlene and I were the only two people who got up from the table and ate the cake from the floor. How can you resist a woman like that?
Okay.
Flirting over food is a big thing,
All right. True or false time?
Yes. Okay. You're going to tell me the truth if I ask you a question?
No. You're going to tell me the truth.
Oh, really?
For MASH, you were cast 6 hours before the series started.
No. False.
Okay. That's what I read on the internet. You can never trust that.
You don't ever trust the internet. Except unless you go to my website, alanalda.com.
And we can trust everything there.
You can trust there because you can even read sections of the book and see if you want to go further with it.
Yeah.
Everything there is true. And even the reviews that say how great the book is.
Yeah, those are the ones that are
I didn't write those myself, although that's getting to be a practice now. So, what was this? Whether I was, no, they asked me to be in MASH while I was still in the Utah State Prison, where I I want to see what happened to your face when you did it. I want to see if you got up to page 200 in the book. I was making a movie in the Utah State Prison where they also held me hostage for a while, truly held me hostage, which was really a weird experience. So I was glad to do almost anything once I got out of prison. However, I needed to find out just a couple of things. It was a great script written by Larry Gelbart. But most of the shows that dealt with the Army or any of the services up until that time were things like McHale's Navy and I think maybe the F Troop and Hogan's Heroes, things that made very light of any suffering that might take place during the war. In fact, there was no suffering. It was like the war was just an excuse for soldiers to get together and have some fun.
Right.
And I just wanted to make sure that because we were dealing with a surgical hospital and people would be coming in wounded, that these people were going to get the respect of our treating that seriously. And I realized that we've stayed up till 2 in the morning talking in a coffee shop the night before rehearsals began. And that's the only time we could have the conversation because I'd been in prison until then. I love to say that.
And I think you're the first guest that said that to me. So.
Oh, you didn't have Colson on and those people from Watergate? No. I mean, it was clear very quickly that we all wanted to, go after the same thing. And I felt great about it. And the next morning we started rehearsing. True
or false then this, that the entire run of MASH, your family lived on the East Coast and you had to work on the West? And
almost true. We would for the first 7 years of the 11 years of the show, we lived in New Jersey, and I went out to California to shoot. And after a few months, I realized that coming home every 3 weeks or so was not good enough. I was talking on the phone to my daughters every day, and then sometimes 2-3 times a day. And when I'd get there, after 3 weeks, I'd find out that one of them was having trouble in English class, and nobody had mentioned it. You know, you kind of have to be around to pick up the little signals. Yeah. So anytime, then for about 4 or 5 months out of the year, for 7 years or so, I would fly home anytime I had 2 days off. And there was 1 week when I flew home 3 times in 7 days.
It just didn't seem like the right thing to move them?
No, I didn't want to move them because neither one of us wanted to move them because they were just all entering their teens. And we felt that was a time when they needed to break away from us and not to be taken into a new environment where they had to make new friends. And we would have thrown them off their schedule, I think, off their development schedule.
How is it that you balance celebrity so well?
Well, I don't know how well I balance it. I balance it as well as I do, partly because my wife taught me that I'm a civilian and that I'm not, I grew up thinking that those of us on this side of the footlights were special and the people in the audience were the civilians. And we somehow knew something that they didn't know, and we were part of a mystical brotherhood. And it was very arrogant. Yeah. And I had to learn all through my life that if I was going to portray these people as an actor and write about them as a writer, I had to learn that I not only was one of them, but I had to learn how to function like one, a normal person. And it's much more interesting to be normal. It's sort of normal.
On that note, I have to say thank you.
Well, thank you.
Wonderful conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed talking with you.
Alan Alda.
Fun.
To order a transcript, call 866-652-3378 or send $6.95 to the address on your screen. Please include the name of the guest.